Christmas tree. We'll have been together 8 years this year, and you are still shedding pine needles all over the floor. So what do you say I make you a tree skirt this year to catch all those pine needles? And what do you say I show you how to make a Christmas tree skirt? You're gonna need about 3 to 4 yards of fabric for this project. You will need a base fabric for the Christmas tree skirt, and I like to use a plain color for that one, but you can use a print if you would like. I also have 2 yards of this floral cotton with red and blue flowers that I think will go well with my ornaments that I have. And while this may not scream Christmas to you, something about it gives me a Christmassy vibe. And I also really wanted to use this fabric since it's a fabric that I inherited from my aunt. You will also need 2 measurements from your tree. You will need to measure the diameter of your tree trunk. That's going to be how wide it is. For a fake Christmas tree like this one, you're probably gonna have a pretty short diameter. Mine is only 1.5 inches wide. But if you buy real Christmas trees, you might have up to a 10-inch diameter for your tree trunk. The second measurement you're going to need is how wide you want your Christmas tree skirt to be to catch all your pine needles. So take one end of your measuring tape and set it right next to the tree trunk and measure how far your branches reach. The branches on my tree reach about 16 inches from the edge of the tree trunk. Oh, it's good to give yourself a few extra inches over the edge of the branches because the needles don't always fall straight down. So give yourself about 2 to 4 extra inches. Start by folding one corner of your fabric up at an angle so your cross and straight grains are flush and there is a fold line on the bias. Find and mark the center of that bias fold line. Then, using that mark as the center of your Christmas tree trunk, mark the diameter along that bias fold. If you pulled your measuring tape really tight around your Christmas tree trunk when you measured it, add an extra 1/2 inch or 1 inch to give yourself a little bit of ease. Now connect these 2 marks in a half circle, continuing to use the center of the bias fold as the center of the diameter of your tree skirt. Now take your second measurement and add a 1/2 inch to 1 inch for your seam allowance and line that up with the half circle you just made. And make a wider half circle all the way around. Then cut your fabric along each half circle. When you unfold it, you will have a full circle with the diameter of your tree's trunk cut out of it. Fold your second fabric as well. Now this is a much larger piece of fabric to work with it, so I folded it on the cross grain, and you're welcome to do that too if you have a larger piece of fabric. Lay your half circle on top of the second fabric, overlapping the fold lines. Pin it down along the edges and cut around the same shape. Unfold your 2 circles, overlap your circles, and slash from one end to the center, cutting through both layers of fabric. Next, we're going to make a ruffle for the edge of the tree skirt. This will not only act as a decorative accent, but it will also serve the functional purposes of corralling the pine needles onto the tree skirt and weighing down the tree skirt so that it is less likely to move when you're putting presents on it. The ideal width of a ruffle on a tree skirt is between 2 to 3 inches. So cut your ruffle strips to between 5 and 6 inches. And use as much fabric as you can for this. Ruffles work better when they have a lot of extra fabric to gather. So you want your ruffles to be about 2 to 3 times the circumference of your total circle. I am using the rest of my backing fabric for the ruffle. Sew your fabric strips together with a straight stitch and press them open. Then fold your entire ruffle in half lengthwise and press it with a lot of steam and heat. I have over 20 feet of fabric here for my ruffles. You will probably have a lot as well. You will sew your gathering stitches along the unfinished edge through both layers of your fabric. And since I have over 20 feet of fabric here for my ruffle, I'm going to make it a little bit more manageable by running 2 lengths of gathering stitches from the center. I like to gather fabric by taking one of the threads, either the top thread or the bobbin thread, pulling it out of my machine the full length of the ruffle. I take a few inches to pull behind my machine under the presser foot, and I bring the rest forward. I then sew a wide zigzag stitch over that thread, making sure I only pin the thread down with the stitches and don't actually hit that thread with the needle. And try to keep your gathering stitches in the seam allowance so you don't have to unpick them later. Holding that center thread in one hand, you can scrunch your fabric into a gather. And since I'm using my center as the anchor point for the gathers, I'm going to do that twice, one on each side of my ruffle. And make sure you finish each end of your ruffle before moving on to the next step. You will also need to make some strings to tie your tree skirt together. Cut these about 1 inch to 1.5 inches wide, and they only need to be about 1 foot long. You will need 4 strips of fabric for the strings. You can either fold your strings in half, right sides together, sew a seam along the outside edge, and then flip them inside out. Or you can press them in half, wrong sides together, then fold each side under and top stitch the outside. I used the second method for mine. I folded them like bias tape and top stitched them down. Here comes the tricky part. We're gonna put it all together. So lay the top of your Christmas tree skirt nice and flat with the right side up. Lay your 4 strings along the opening of your tree skirt. Place the 2 along the center of the tree skirt about 1 inch from the middle, and place the 2 on the edge of your tree skirt about 1.5 inches from the edge, so you have a little extra room for that ruffle. Hand baste these in place, leaving a little extra of your string over the edge of the tree skirt opening. Now it's time to take this big, beautiful ruffle and pin it to the tree skirt, lining the 2 ends up with the opening. Pin that raw gathered edge to the edge of the tree skirt with the ruffle facing into the center of the skirt. Pin the end of your ruffle about 1/2 inch from the opening of the tree skirt because you already have the ruffle finished, but you don't have the edge of the tree skirt finished. So we need a little extra room there. Oh, this is gonna take a lot of pins. Make sure none of your strings are caught in that ruffle, and sew a line of stitching all along the edge, sewing the top of the tree skirt to the ruffle. I pinned the bottom edge of the ruffle to itself to make sure it will clear the opening of the tree skirt. Use a long stitch on your machine and be very liberal with that seam allowance. You want it to be about 3/4 of an inch wide, and it's even okay to make it 1 inch wide. Lay that out nice and flat, and you are ready to pin the bottom of the tree skirt onto it. And we're gonna pin these right sides together. And pin along the opening and the center of the tree skirt as well. Make sure it's all smoothed out and there are no wrinkles, and then flip it over. Sew the tree skirt together from the top side. We want to make a seam line about 1/4 of an inch from the seam line we just sewed. So it'll be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch from the edge. This will allow the ruffle to relax inside a little bit. Make sure you don't catch the finished edge of the ruffle when you sew the opening closed. Backstitch to reinforce the strings. And leave yourself about 6 inches so you can put your hand through to turn the skirt inside out. And use a shorter seam allowance, about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, when you're sewing the center of the skirt closed. And you can also use a shorter stitch for the opening and the center, and a longer stitch for the edge with the ruffle. And just take this one nice and slow and be mindful of your pins. Time to turn it inside out. Tuck the edges of that opening in. You can sew it shut with an invisible stitch, you can sew it by hand, or you can top stitch along the whole opening and around the center of the skirt as well. Once you sew this closed, you can press your tree skirt and it is done. That's really pretty. I really like the way this came out. Even though I don't love this floral pattern, I think it works really, really well with this tree. And it kind of gives it a vintage vibe, you know, something that would have been homemade during the 70s. But it would look great with a bunch of different fabrics as well. You could use prints, you can use solids, you can use embroidered fabric or quilt the whole thing. It's a really versatile pattern and it's also really easy to make. With the exception of that 20-something foot ruffle, this is a really easy project to do, so it doesn't matter how advanced you are at sewing. You can do this if you're a beginner too. This is a great project you can make for yourself, but you can also make it for somebody else too. It's a really good Christmas gift, and it's not too expensive either. I hope you enjoyed making this project as much as I did, and I'd love to know how yours turned out. Let me know in the comments. Leave a like if you haven't already, and make sure you subscribe to my channel if you want to make more Christmas decorations this year, because I have a few more videos to come out all December long. Thank you so much for watching my video, everyone. I will see you next time.